your audio quality sounds good right there, but I am going to record everyone.
So I got a Jim Anderson. Looks like he's having trouble joining. Hey, everybody on? Okay. So good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The reason for this press conference is to talk about the need to do a special session to address some of these issues that we're faced with.
She's not on there. She's not.
And hang on, I'm going to mute everybody here, I guess.
That doesn't help.
So to address the issues that we're facing. So we have the governor passing proclamations that some of us agree with or disagree with, but there's more and more concern about how these proclamations are affecting our economy and the decisions that are being made. And we all represent our constituents. Our constituents are screaming that they want to go back to work. It's having a devastating effect on the economy. Not only that, when we go back, the state budget is going to have such a gigantic hole that it's going to be very difficult to fill next year. So my concern is that we want to have a special session to address the budget issues, and we want to address getting back to work and how to do that. From my point of view, if a business has a safety protocol in place, they run it by the Department of Health, they get the nod, they can go back to work. So with that, I guess I'll go to Senator Ericksen, and then we'll go to Jesse, and then we'll go to Vicki. We all represent our constituents.
Hey, thank you, Phil. I appreciate you putting together this call for today. Can everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm. We can just record the call. That's the main thing. I don't give a crap about.
And if you could please mute your computer screen also, that'd be great. If you're not talking, we can hear a little bit of background noise there.
Space key unmutes it.
So one of the things I'd just like to stress is that Washington State's in a crisis mode right now, and I think that the people of Washington State expect their legislature to go back to work to try to address many of the issues that can't be addressed via an executive order. Lots of things in terms of our small businesses, the tax load on them, not to mention the incredible budget shortfall we're going to face here in just a couple of months as tax dollars flowing into the state treasury are dropping off a cliff right now. We have to protect the health of the people, but we also have to be taking steps right now to start bringing manufacturing jobs home from China, start looking for ways to cut our budgets in Olympia. And that really requires the legislature coming back into session. So I think it's really the only responsible thing for the Washington State legislature to do is to go back into a special session and take action immediately to protect the people of Washington. Small businesses are shutting their doors, they're going bankrupt, and we have to go to Olympia and take action to protect the people we represent and protect our economy going forward, while at the same time protecting the health and safety of the people of Washington. The economy and the health of the citizens are linked, and it'll take a legislative session to make sure that we're standing up for both at the same time.
Go ahead, Jesse.
Well, guys, we're getting a lot of feedback. Hopefully this is coming across so people can pay attention. Look, we did a very good amount of teamwork and a great effort when we left the session and passed a major stimulus package. But that was always going to be, and was always meant to be, the first start. And so what's reticent upon us is that it's now time to come back. We are empowered with a lot of more information. And we also have to understand that any type of economic recovery stimulus that we want to institute is going to require that we dig the well before we need the water. And if we keep waiting for more and more data, there are some out there that want to ask for. Sorry, that feedback is killing me. If we want to ask for more data, we have to understand that there's going to be a lag time before we're able to actually implement any of our solutions. So we need to come back now. To the regard that people suggest that we should issue another committee, another workforce, let's just keep in mind that we are the committee and we as a legislative body are the workforce that the people of Washington elected to go do this. To suggest anything otherwise would be to suggest that we don't even need a legislature. It is time for us to come back in the session. Our small business community needs greater stimulus. The money has run out. People need greater resolutions than just having specific mandates suggested by the governor. And now we're at the point where now he needs additional legislative approval anyway. It's time to call us back in. To not do that is really shirking our responsibility. There are people out there hurting. whether it's a fixed income family just trying to make it, whether it's a sheltered person that's demographically more at risk that doesn't even want to risk going outside. There are solutions out there, whether it's engaging the broader church community, whether it's engaging broader governance, but we can't do that if we don't call ourselves back into session. It is pertinent, it is timely, and we are the people that are elected to go do this, not some selected appointed group that's going to sit down and maybe make recommendations in another month, another week while people suffer. And we have to also keep in mind the broader health of the community. This is not just about coronavirus health. This is about the mental health and the practical health of people that can't get into the hospital. People that we are forcing to delay non-existential, non-emergency conditions are starting to mature into emergency conditions. This is putting their life and their health at risk. All of these considerations are what we were elected to consider. It's now time that we call ourselves back together, and solve these solutions. And we're the group to do it. No more kicking the can down the road to somebody else. Now is the time. Selected appointed group that's going to sit down and maybe make recommendations in another month, another week.
So Senator Fortunato, I take it I'm up. And can you hear me okay? Okay, thank you. I will just say this. As we started down this unfortunate coronavirus road, really around the end of March, I called on both the House Speaker and our House Leader and the Legislative Director to go back to special session because of the reality that we were starting to see the impact. And $200 million, as we've all stated, essentially, we know is not enough. It certainly isn't enough to address the health aspect needs, whether it's PPE or testing. Got some feedback there. I'm hoping that's not me. Or the needs of our businesses and even hospitals right now. So financially, we can't just wait for the federal government to bail us out, which I am concerned is happening at our state level. So we have some accountability to our people to try to get them funding quickly within the means that we have. And certainly we had quite a bit as we went into the 2020 session. We likely should have had more on tap at this point to be able to use in a real time of emergency. Regardless, we do need to do that. But as I've also talked to small business owners, really on both sides of the aisle, I've had tremendous amount of concern felt from these folks and saying, we can get back to work safely, but we have to get back to work now, or we won't have anything to come back to for our employees and certainly for their own livelihoods.
Airports.
So we can't.
A lot of people just stepped up and did it. There were a few that complained, but we changed. And I think that this is going to change the way we go through airports again. So I think I'm willing to do, what keeps us all safe.
Yeah, I think it's okay as long as they, like what you were saying, Marie, Eve, is that you have to be careful of privacy.
Yeah.
Yes. We're treading on very dangerous lines. And I understand, Marie, what you're saying about, after 9/11, we had some intrusion upon our privacy, and we might have more intrusion upon our privacy right now. But I want us to be protected in both ways for our own private citizenship as well as a people.
Yeah. I know that they said something.
That test that they have. They have a 10-minute test, and that's what it is to get on the plane. They take blood from your finger. 10 minutes later, you know whether you can get on the plane or not. So I don't think there's, it wouldn't bother me at all. I'd feel safer knowing.
So is that coming from the Coin News channel?
Well.
I think so. Hey, Phil.
So many interesting topics coming up as we move into this new way of life. All right, let's move on to something a little later. When John Lennon left the Beatles, why couldn't the remaining members
Okay, I don't know what happened there, so we'll go back to Vicki. So go ahead, Vic.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to wrap up just by saying this. We all know the need right now. We've got to reopen Washington safely. We've got to plan out as Republicans to do this. We need to move. The bottom line is I've heard concerns from many leaders that would normally be in Olympia. We're all at home at this time especially. But, I've heard concern from people saying, well, we can't call for a special session because, the other side of the aisle might run a state income tax. And I said, you know what? If they really seriously are going to try to threaten something like that, then let them, because it's the majority. They will own that. And there is not one person, not one business at all that is small business, especially in our state, that I think at this time especially would welcome that. And so if they want to try to make this difficult, which I would hope not, this should be a bipartisan effort. We all have constituents that are hurting on every level. We need to make this a bipartisan effort.
Replacing somebody like that is just fine. I think if somebody passes away and they want to replace them, I think that can be done legitimately. But for example, one of my really good friends, Ross Valerie, who is...
I don't know where that's coming from, but whoever that is, please get your act together there. Go ahead, Vicki.
That was it. We need a bipartisan approach by the legislature to come together for a special session, to act on behalf of our constituents all across the state with various needs right now that are critical. And, we need to stick to coronavirus issues and not try on anybody's part to do anything outside of what's necessary. And I believe we can do it if we work together on that.
So I want to stress the historical aspect here. The legislature has never called itself back into special session. And some of the concerns that people have on a minority side of the aisle is that this is going to open it up to a lot of different things. If the legislature calls itself in a special session, they have to have a focus. We want to have the focus simply be on budget issues and the governor's proclamations of getting people back to work. So it would be a confined special session dealing with those two issues. Now, in order to actually implement this, you need a 2/3 vote of the legislature. So I sent out an email to all my fellow legislators, which is just a simple Outlook email. And Outlook has a feature called Vote. So if we get 2/3 of our members that both in the House and the Senate, 2/3 in the House, 2/3 in the Senate, that agree that they want to go back into special session, then we could have a group get together, form a resolution that we would then go back into special session, vote on this resolution. The resolution would define what we are going to talk about, and then we would be constrained to those issues. So it would not broaden out the issues that we can to deal with. But there is extreme impacts here that are rippling through the entire system. For example, I was opposed to bonding toll revenue, and the toll bonds were triple back bonds. If there wasn't enough toll revenue, it would go to the transportation budget. If there wasn't enough money in the transportation budget, it would go to the general fund budget. Well, there's no money in the transportation budget. That means not only is the general fund going to get hit with this huge impact from the economic downturn and the loss of revenue there, it's also going to get stuck paying for any bonds that were issued for under the tolling package. So those are some of the things that we need to talk about. And we need to be, if we have ideas to getting back to work and the Democrats have ideas getting back to work, we need to get out on the Senate floor and we need to fight this out on the Senate floor. That's why we're here. That's why people elect their elected representatives. They don't elect them to sit here and write letters to Santa Claus, because that's all we're doing. I'm sitting here and I'm writing letters to the editor. Dear Governor, do this. Dear Governor, do that. And just like Santa Claus hasn't sent me a response, neither has the governor. So we need to be a little more proactive. We need to represent our constituents. This isn't a partisan issue. This isn't Republicans calling for this and Democrats opposing it. And we're hoping that some Democrats are going to get on board also. I mean, we've heard that some of them are concerned with the legislative oversight. So with that, I guess any questions anybody has? There's a hand-raising feature, but I'm going to run the risk and unmute everybody and see what happens. So anybody have any questions? You can unmute yourself.
Senator Fortunato, Essex here.
Yes, sir.
Help me understand what you would do in a special session. Are you asking for a special session so you can overturn the governor's proclamations?
No, we're asking for a special session so we could discuss the governor's proclamations. We may decide to extend them. We may agree with some. We may disagree with some. But shouldn't our constituents have their elected officials be able to give feedback on these proclamations? Right now, if the governor issues a proclamation, you know what we do? We write a letter. That's it. I mean, what is my capacity as a senator or representatives? What is their capacity to represent their people when all we're doing is writing letters to the governor? Now, as Jesse points out, the governor has to come back to the legislature for approval on certain things. And some of those things have expired or they're coming due very quickly. And he either needs to get agreement from the leadership of the Four Corners or he needs to call a special session. Now, I believe, and many of us believe, there's going to be a special session. So it's just a matter of time. So whether it be now or in 6 months, sooner is better than later to address these economic issues because the economic impact here is going to be devastating.
Representative Kraft, what would you like to hear from the governor tonight?
I would like to hear from the governor that he is truly hearing the people speak. And as their legislators, that's why we're here. And that is what we are trying to do, is make their voice heard. Again, I've talked with Republicans, I've talked with Democrats, business owners, some in Seattle area who can't really get responses back from their own legislators. So we need the governor to act. And at this point, I would urge him to call a special session. It needs to be bipartisan, and we all need to be very serious about doing what's best for our constituents, and that is safely reopening Washington.
Look, I want to, Vicki, thank you. Essex, I want to hear the governor say that he wants to work with the Washington State Legislature more than he wants to work with governors from other states. And that's not meant to be a little quip. It truly, the other governors have to take care of their own states. We're elected to take care of this state. And thus far, the Republican caucuses from the House of Representatives and from the Senate have been extremely bipartisan and have made a strong effort to not make this political. It's now time to engage us in more candor. It's time to get the legislature back because there are things that we can do that the governor simply cannot. And it's not just to come back and counter him, as Senator Fortunato just pointed out. And we already made the case for. He needs legislative approval for extension on some things anyway. But the broader context of re-engaging the economy, reigniting it, creating greater capital liquidity, these things take time. They also take effort. We need to do them now. And the governor should be working with the legislature that was duly elected by Washington State and Washington citizens, not governors from other states. That makes it political. This is an attempt to get us all back in the House to do the people's business. I think this is a great opportunity for us to all show the state of Washington that we can get this done on behalf of people.
Essex, this is Doug Ericksen here, just really quickly. In order to get through a crisis like this, you need consistency in how you implement the proclamations. So I'd like to hear Governor Inslee tonight explain why it's okay to be building a dormitory at Whatcom Community College, but not okay for a small business to be building a home. I'd like to hear Governor Inslee explain why I can go fishing in Idaho, but I can't go fishing in Washington State. I'd like to hear him explain why it's dangerous to buy a car in Washington State, but it's perfectly safe to buy a car in Idaho or Oregon. When you see those types of inconsistencies and an inconsistency on how he's applying his proclamations, I just want him to step back and say, you know what? We had to make a lot of decisions very quickly. I'm listening to the letters I'm getting from legislators and from the public, and we're going to step back from some of these decisions that probably weren't the best, but he was making a lot very quickly, and mistakes will be made. He just has to recognize that and try to make some corrections now to help out those people who are really hurting.
I have a question about what are some sectors of industry that under the governor's definition are maybe right now not essential anyone, this is for anyone, that could be available and safe to go back to work? What are some focuses there as far as the sectors of industry?
Well, if I could chime in really quickly, as Doug points out, it's the inconsistency that we have a problem with. And a company or organization should be able to put together a protocol on how they intend to go back to business, go back to work. Now, I have a little bit of a problem where I could go to Costco, where I'm in there with 300 people now. And I use Costco as an example because I think they're doing a great job. They're sterilizing all the carts. People are going in there. They're spacing the people out. They have a protocol in place, but there's still 300 people in there. They have screens put up at the checkouts, and they have a protocol in place to be dealing with this issue. Now, why can't the car dealership do that? Why can't the other little local business do that? Why can't they, the dry cleaner or whatever? I mean, I drove Brown Bear Car Wash, and if somebody could explain to me why Brown Bear Car Wash in Auburn is closed, I haven't the faintest idea why. And you have this inconsistency, and you also have these businesses that are afraid. They don't actually know. They don't know whether they could go back to work or not. And they don't know whether they're essential or non-essential. And I took offense to, as soon as he came out with that essential and non-essential stuff, I mean, that's where we parted company. And, I feel very strongly about going back to work. Nobody wants to get this virus. So people want to go back to work, but they want to go back to work safely. They don't want loans. They want government bailouts. They don't want special programs. They just want to go back to work. And that's the best way to get things going.
I wonder,
you really quick.
mentioned that you need.
Hey, Jim, I just want to chime in really quick on that. Sorry, Jim. One of the things is if we have essential jobs that are dangerous, we have to be careful how we get people back into those places, whether it's at a grocery store or first responders. But if you have industries that are not essential, but also not dangerous, we should allow those people to go back to work, whether it's a golf course, whether it's a fishing guide, whether it's home construction, doing insulation, drywalling. Those might not be considered essential to some people in government. They're essential to the people who are making their living doing it, but they're also low risk and not dangerous. And we have to put that into the equation also.
Well, I think it's also worth noting to everybody that the stay-at-home orders that the governor has enacted, that the people of Washington have abided by, have been producing results, but they will only work if people continue to choose to abide by them. And we are seeing greater instances of civil disobedience, however you want to label it. But if that continues to occur because people are frustrated at not feeling as though they're being listened to, then this whole system falls apart anyways. The way to address that is to get us back in doing our jobs and starting to respond to people. The governor needs to recognize this because his solutions that he's offering will not work if people do not choose to abide by them. Getting us back in there to start crafting real solutions is the key to everything working and not falling apart.
So you're going to need bipartisan.
I agree. I'm just going to mention one thing. As I do talk to business owners, we all have been, it was tough, I'd say, for all of us to really probably go into a 30-day stay-at-home order, right? That's just not something any of us are used to doing. But I think really by and large, most people did it in good faith. I know I was one of those. Hesitantly, it was a little challenging to see how some of this rolled out, but with the understanding, hey, we need to give this a chance. We need to make sure we prioritize public safety. Now we've done that. The numbers are trending down. Business owners are saying, hey, May 4th, that I can't really go beyond that. I'm already at a point where this may not come back as far as their business. So just to echo that point of, no matter what front we're talking about right now, May 4th is about as long as most people, I think, are going to stand for this, whether it's because of a business need or it's I can't stand being in my house anymore. This is something the governor needs to heed. I don't think going beyond May 4th is even an option for most people at this stage.
Okay, Jim, go ahead. You had a question?
Yes, you're going to need bipartisan support for this. You're going to need 2/3 of the legislature to vote, and you're going to need the support of your leadership. So I don't see any Democrats on this Zoom call, and I don't see either of the Republican leaders here. So how are you going to get that?
Well, that's the purpose of this Zoom call, and that's the purpose of the email that we sent out. And, hopefully, we have to convince our other members. You have two different things that we're talking about. One is the governor can call a special session. He doesn't need to ask us. He could just make an announcement tomorrow afternoon, say, on this date, I'm going to have a special session. Everybody come back. The purpose of what we're trying to do is if the governor is not going to act quickly enough, and I don't feel we need to be doing this like now, then the purpose of this is to have the legislature itself call us back into special session. And that, as you point out, requires a 2/3 vote. But if you don't ask, you don't get. How do we know? I mean, as this progresses and people on the other side of the aisle are getting maybe a little more frustrated, some of the Democrats that agree with actually doing this are reticent to sign on or agree because they feel that they could convince the governor to loosen things up. Well, if this session and this particular pitch starts putting a little more pressure on the governor to listen to us more, to give us more feedback, we have some members in the caucuses that are together on a work group meeting. They're talking to the governor, they're working with him. If this spurs the governor on to pay a little more attention and to be a little more responsive and to loosen some things up on his own, that's a success. Pardon me. But by the same token, if he continues to stonewall everybody on both sides of the aisle, this is an opportunity that are out there that maybe people might not agree this week, but next week it might be a different story. So it's an option out there. We've laid it out. We've laid out what needs to be done and how it can be done. And if we have to drag our leadership along with us, if enough members agree, that's the way it is. That's politics.
And are you talking about coming back in person, or are you talking about some sort of virtual session?
Well, I also sent a letter to the Attorney General asking him whether it would be possible to do a virtual special session, whether there's any constitutional issues or things like that. I don't know how that would possibly be managed, but it may be something that we could look at to somehow see if we could come to an agreement.
It's worth noting. It's worth noting that even if we had to be there in person, we only need to be there in person to make a vote. All of the pre-work can be done remotely. All of the negotiations can be done remotely. All of the staff can draft this up remotely. All of these things can be done. We don't have to be there in person. And that is typical for most special sessions. The people that are negotiating are doing so while many of the rest of us are still working our private sector jobs. And when it's required to come vote on an agreed upon package, we come down, we're there for a couple of hours, we pass the vote, and then we leave. So there need not be a major coronavirus worry here, because a lot of this work, 99% of it, can be done remotely anyways, and we could still follow the Constitution.
Can you just remind us of what you would envision being in this package, the legislative package?
Well, I mean, two things. I mean, realistically, we have to determine what we're going to talk about, what we're going to address. And you have two things that we're looking at addressing: the governor's proclamations, and whether we agree or disagree, and budget issues. That's the two things that I'm concerned about, and most of us are concerned about. So you have businesses getting back to work and what we could do to get Washington moving again. And then you have the budget impacts. The sooner we start addressing budget impacts and budget cuts, the better off we are going to be. So, I'm looking to state employees to help me find government waste and all this stuff. But by the same token, you can't have government employees get a 3% raise when everybody else is taking this gigantic hit. And so I think we ought to be we need to be talking about budget cuts and things like that now, because the more we cut it now, the less impact we're going to have in January.
I think that Phil just summed it up very nicely. I think that I have three considerations. One is the economy, specifically with regard to getting capital out there for the economy to start going. We certainly have regulatory issues we need to work out and address through the session. But specifically, if we don't address capital liquidity, we're going to be sunk. It's going to be harder to get the economy going. We have healthcare issues. Keep in mind that there are certain healthcare a major portion of healthcare that is still shut down. And the longer we wait to reenact that, the more that's going to materialize into greater emergencies for people's health. And finally, faith-based. We must address this. There is a huge part of our private sector that is willing and able to help us, and we are not engaging them. Those are all topics I'd be interested in discussing.
Yeah, and this is Representative Kraft. Along those lines, one of the things that's been interesting, because there are so many different aspects of the coronavirus situation and how it is impacting different sectors, different areas, whether it's healthcare, obviously our constituents, business, you name it. There are legislators that, sometimes gravitate towards certain areas like mental health, for example. And I do think a special session is a really good and important opportunity for us to take a holistic look, again, as a legislature and with the governor, to take that bipartisan look to say, okay, we have to prioritize here. We have immediate needs. What are they? And you hit phase one, and then you have a plan moving ahead over the next few months as well, so that we aren't reactive. I mean, we're already in that mode somewhat by nature of an emergency. But the more we wait, it just puts us more in a reactive mode and absolutely puts all of our constituents, no matter the sector, in a very vulnerable position, more so than today, which is saying a lot.
And I'm curious, hi, this is Hannah Scott with Cairo Radio. I know there are some Republican members that are on the task force that the governor's got formed. Is it your sense, or have you communicated with those members that they aren't getting anywhere with that task force?
So if I can pipe in a little bit, just yesterday we had a conference call in our caucus, and our members that are on that task force are feeling the frustration. We've had, in addition to our member task forces, we also had industry task forces, where you had the construction industry working with the governor for weeks on end, finally come up with a plan, and they say, here's phase one of our plan to get residential and commercial back to work. This is what we're going to do. Here's our plan. They gave it to the governor, and the next day, some news organization asked the governor about it, and he said, well, I didn't read the letter yet. Now, we need to be pushing him in order to get the ball moving here. I mean, that's the scary part. That's the scary part for our members who are on these task forces. Hey, we're having these meetings. What's the point? We're not getting anywhere. We're not getting any feedback. It's not a two-way conversation. It's just, I called it writing letters to Santa Claus. So that's the frustration that we're feeling. And the question comes in is, if the governor's not going to move, how can we as legislators make him move or move ourselves without him? And that's what this is. This is a legislative call to bring ourselves back into special session. Now, if this puts pressure on the governor to call us back into special session, so be it. But I'm frustrated. Members of all these committees are frustrated. If you represent your constituents, how do you think I feel when I get a car dealer, a small, tiny little guy who tried to sell a car, and the Department of Revenue shows up and says they're going to fine him $5,000 and take away his business license, right? Where the heck is that written down? And what am I supposed to do as that person's representative? So those are some of the issues that we need to be discussing.
Hey,
Go ahead.
Just really quick for Hannah Scott. I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead, Vicki. I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt you.
Oh, just a quick other note. We don't talk all the time about our local governments and the impact they're facing, but as many of you know, and as ranking member on the House Local Government Committee, our counties and cities, they are absolutely hurting. I mean, if we think at the state we're going to see a financial impact, they absolutely are seeing financial impact. So again, I mean, this is absolutely a holistic challenge, impact being felt by all levels, all sectors. And if we do not take the responsibility we have, all of us as legislators and certainly the governor, to address this holistic issue, we're putting our constituents and other sectors at big risk.
So, hey, Hannah, to address your question really quickly, there are certain things the governor can't do by executive action that require legislative action. That's why we need to go back in. Now, will these task forces that are currently being organized work? Hopefully, they'll come forward with great solutions. But what we find in Olympia is when you have a timeline, so say, for example, the legislature said we're going to call ourselves back into special session in 10 days or 2 weeks, that puts a pretty hard time frame on these committees to get their work done now. And it also shows the people of Washington State that we're working for them. We're taking this seriously at the government level also. So when the government tells you that we're going to force you to shut down, the government better be working pretty hard to have a plan to get you back to work. And that's why we have to have this special session, to put a timeline on it and to bring the sense of urgency to those government employees who are still getting their full paycheck. They got to get to work. You know, if you're working from home as a government employee right now, getting your full paycheck, you have a less sense of urgency than that small business owner, that construction person, the fishing guy, the auto dealer, go down your list, who is not working and not getting paid. So they want to see the urgency out of their elected officials, the way they're feeling the urgency on the ground.
Yes, this is Jeff Pogela with Como News. A quick question, and forgive me if you addressed this early on as I jumped on a couple of minutes late. What is the reaction, if you've seen the news, to Franklin County and their commissioners now voting to ignore essentially the governor's stay-at-home order? What's your reaction to that? And then I have a follow-up.
Well, I would chime in first and say that's one of the reasons why we've called this conference call together and are trying to make this case. The governor's plan does not work if people begin to not follow suit with it. If people choose to believe that they've got a better route and it's not a coordinated response because they feel as though the governor's not listening to them or the legislature is not engaged, then this model breaks down, period. It doesn't matter what we do or what the governor gets up and says, whether it's motivational, whether it's bipartisan, whether people agree with it or not. If people continue to fall away from it because they don't feel engaged, the model breaks down. This is a way we engage the entire state. We show them that we're responsive. We were the body that was elected to deal with this. Put us back in action. Get us off the sidelines so we can solve these problems and so that everybody's working together as a team. And that really is the fundamental basis for why we're calling this today.
Right. And one of the reasons that they're doing that is they see inconsistencies that don't make any sense. You know, I could go to Costco, but I can't go play golf. I can go to Costco, but I can't go fishing. You know, I mean, we should be demanding that, hey, I paid X amount of dollars for a fishing license. You took my right to fish away. I want my money back. We should be refunding all these fishing licenses and everything else. Those are the things that we need to be discussing to represent our constituents and things. But when they see this inconsistency, when they see that you can do construction on low-income housing that the government is sponsoring, but you can't, as Doug points out, you can't build your own house, you can't build commercial projects, you know, that inconsistency makes it seem like there's some political motive behind this. Now, there may or may not be, doesn't matter. The economic impact is the same. And when you see that, the tremendous difference between Eastern and Western Washington and the effects that the virus may have in Franklin County, for example. I don't know how many cases are in Franklin County, but Franklin County would have a better handle on that, and it would be able to say, look, we don't have that many cases here. We should be able to open up our businesses. We'll have these protocols in place, but that would be different than if you were in downtown Seattle. So rather than have these statewide edicts and these statewide mandates, the locals should be able to have more control. Nobody wants the spread of this virus to happen. We all want to be safely. Nobody wants to jeopardize our family members or whatever. But by the same token, we can't starve our businesses and therefore the families that rely on those incomes.
So what do you say to those governments, whether it's city or county, Eastern Washington, Western Washington, rural or urban, that want to go on their own, defy the governor's order and reopen their own businesses?
Well,
Doug Ericksen here. Oh,
go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, so up here in Linden, our city manager and our mayor and the city council made a determination that they would interpret Governor Inslee's edict on residential construction in a more liberal fashion. And they sent out a letter, and now we have 400 people going back to work in Linden in residential and commercial construction in the private sector right now. They're doing it safely, they're following guidelines, and they're going forward. So, and as Jesse has highlighted, this is the need for the special session to get us down there to make sure that we are addressing these issues. But I say those city governments and those locals are going to make the decisions that are best for their communities. And that's the way it's going to play out here until we get back together as a legislature and start making some tough decisions also.
So we're pushing our time limit. Do we have any more questions? You can raise your hand or give us a high sign.
Well, Phil, I just
sorry, I'm on the phone. This is Hannah Scott again. I just was curious if any of you had individual conversations with any of the public health officials in your own districts and felt that you had a really solid understanding of the health impacts of this virus.
Well, I could speak to that. I have, and I know that there's an underutilization completely of some of our hospitals. There's a frustration of those that are putting boots on the ground. We cannot continue to let non-emergency cases turn into emergency cases as a healthcare model, especially when our hospitals are underutilized. That is what I'm hearing, and I got to tell you that makes complete sense to me. And the thought that we would go back to our constituents and say, I know you've got some type of issue with your health that you're worried is going to turn into something greater. When they're basically telling us it's not going to turn into something greater, it's going to turn into something existential. We need to address that, and we cannot continue to keep our healthcare model turned into just an emergency only model. That's dangerous for the health of everybody. So we must act.
To follow up on that, are you speaking specifically about loosening the regulations on non-emergency healthcare that have been put in, or the restrictions on quote non-emergency healthcare?
No, I don't want to be, I'm not saying you're attempting to pigeonhole me, but let me just be clear. We're asking to get the legislature back involved so we can address this with the collective wisdom of the body. That's the important fact here. Those issues would be the types of questions I would want to let some of the members of the healthcare committee engage, that have those established.
Right. I will just chime in with, part of the reality is we've been on, I'm sure most of us at various points, if not all points, have been on the Washington State Hospital Association calls. And I know last week they were talking about, because of the reality that in a lot of these hospitals, if it's a non-emergency staff, right, there are certain sections of doctors, nurses, et cetera, that they literally have, let go home because they couldn't do, elective surgeries, et cetera. And I know one of the examples they've said is, we are actually talking with hospitals about allowing cancer surgery, certain types of cancer surgeries to be done, because right now those have been put on hold. And for someone who has cancer, there was a determination, right, if it was not immediate life-threatening. But still, if you ask a cancer patient, hey, just wait a few months, we'll get to you, that's concerning. And if there's capacity and it can be done safely in the hospitals, absolutely, we should be doing that. I'll also mention to the earlier question, I was on a Clark County, call yesterday, an update, and our public health official talked about an R0 number, which I thought was interesting as one of the factors being, considered by some, and whether or not we should go back and how we should reopen. And he said that the R0 number being looked to is less than 1, meaning if there is a positive case, someone has coronavirus, that they would infect less than 1 person. Okay. So I said, well, is Clark County, what's our R0 number? He said, Clark County's had so few cases that, we really can't even determine an R0 number. He said, but in Puget Sound, for example, the current R0 number is less than 1. So it already meets the criteria. And he did say, there's a confidence level around that that's, unknown right now. So, you can't, I guess, take it home to the bank, I would say, for his comments. But the point is, we absolutely have been moving in the right direction in the state. And so, again, it's time to act safely and reopen safely.
Okay, so we're trying to finish up. Any other questions going on, or any other concerns that we can address? Okay, with that, I'd like to say thank you all for coming very much. And thanks for your feedback and your questions and your interest. Thank you. Have a nice day.